well, it's just, by my watch it's 7, that may be slow.
I don't need a watch.
So I think there may be a few people coming in.
Exactly.
But we will start.
All right.
My name is Doug Sobey, and how many are new to these talks tonight? Just raise your hand if you've not been. So you've come specifically to hear Wayne, haven't you?
Yes.
The others are just here because they're here every week.
That's true. That's true.
It's somewhere to go on a Monday. Well, Wayne and I,
We go way back, but we never met.
we went through school together at Summerside High School, right from grade 1 to grade. Did you finish at?
Well, I went to Athena Regional High School for grade 8.
Yes.
And 9.
I stayed in Summerside.
Yeah.
But we never were in the same class.
We always had the different teachers.
And Wayne has developed an extensive career since then. I won't go into his education. I'll just read or tell you about what Wayne considers the most important things of his career. And, well, of course, you all know Wayne from his cartoons in the Journal Pioneer, going back to
1979, yes.
And the Guardian as well, from early days?
The Guardian predates the Journal. I was working for the Angus MacLean conservative their campaign, and I had drawn many cartoons, and they didn't want them.
Well, I'll carry.
You carry on. You carry on.
I'll carry on.
And so I sold them to the Guardian for $5 each.
But apart from his cartoons, Wayne, you probably know, is also a portrait artist and museum designer, and his work is found and has a large contribution to the PEI Sports Hall of Fame, the International Fox Hall of Fame, the Prince Edward Island Curling Hall of Fame, and the Lennox Island Cultural Wall of Fame.
Yep, for which I get paid $14 in every tour. That's fine, though. I'm so honored to be part of that wonderful thing.
And Wayne, you would be contributing pictures of people, isn't it, of these
Well, I'd also curate research
Yep.
and such things.
And he's
over
also
years.
the author of several books of poetry, community history, and local humor. His bronze monumental sculptures depicting everyone from explorer John Cabot to, where is that one, Wayne?
That's at Cabot Beach
Oh,
Provincial
is it?
Park. Yeah.
I see.
On
To
a big boat.
harness legend Joe O'Brien.
Yeah,
which
I
is
just found that the other day.
Where is it?
Alberton.
Alberton,
Oh, yes.
where he was born. And so his sculptures can be found across the island. So Wayne is going to speak to us tonight on a topic called Dark Island.
Yeah.
It's Wayne's own tour. He's going to give us a tour, a lighthearted tour through the paranormal and all sorts of topics. So,
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So Wayne,
Hello,
take
Doug.
it.
Thanks, Doug, and that's all sort of true, all that stuff, and I will say this. The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. Now, Albert Einstein said that, but I said it first. And so what I'm going to do tonight, we're going to go through some of the big safari things of the paranormal, the Dark Island. I think Ryan's Fancy had a song called Dark Island, but I've always loved that, and I put together long ago the ideas, the armature for a book on island paranormal realities, and I was calling it Dark Island. I probably will never finish that book. There's 3 or 4 books I've never finished. One of them is the history of Wilmot. Never finished it. I have written the history of Callback's General Store. In 1999, I did that. But Catherine and Bill declined to go with it, and that's all right. And I've done other things that I haven't completed. But I have completed a few things. And what I'm going to do tonight is begin with, it seems to me, fitting from 2 or 3 different angles. That we start with, this is not a very well-drawn portrait. I drew this in 1982. A lot of us are watching the Olympic Games right now. I remember in 1976, I got a little cottage. I rented a cottage with Eileen Olton in Alberton. I said, Eileen, I'm going to be up here for 2 weeks watching the Olympics. And I brought my little 9-inch TV, and I watched the Olympic Games up there in 1976. And later, when I was traveling to Ireland, I met Ernie Afghanis of CBC, and I told him all about this. So I love sport. I wasn't the greatest athlete in the world, but I am a bit of a historian of island sport. And I thought tonight, because we are traditionally honoring the Mi'kmaq people of the island, that I would bring a picture of Barney Francis with me. And as you know, some of you know, the 1924 Paris Olympics were the Chariots of Fire Olympics, probably even more wonderful in their simplistic way than these wonderful things going on now in Paris, France right now. But Barney, because we're on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, I brought this picture along because I wanted to say a couple of things. In 1923, Barney, from Lennox Island, a war hero by that time, like one of many war heroes, came back to PEI and of course was treated shamefully. And so he went off to Jamaica Plains, Boston, to work on the high-rise skyscrapers. Barney did. But in 1923, he was a Canadian champion in the mile. So he could have been on that movie, Chariots of Fire, that many of you have seen. But what Barney had to encounter was, again, the terrible racism of his rival, of his fellow teammates on the Canadian Olympic team. And so they got him drunk, and Barney didn't go to Paris because Barney didn't perform well at the pre-Olympic trials in Winnipeg. But Barney is going to be one of the 11 people that I'm now putting up in the Sports Hall of Fame in Summerside to represent our 11 Olympians that we've had. I'm drawing some of them over again because over time you say, my gosh, I wasn't the best artist in the world. But Barney, I want to tell you something about Barney. And it leads into the next thing we're doing tonight. We're talking about the paranormal. In 1982, when we inducted Barney, he came in through the front door of the Uptech Center in Summerside with all of his little papooses, which is our grandchildren. And he was a tiny little man, about 95 pounds. And Barney came in through the front door of the Uptech Center, and I'll never forget it. They were all dressed in wonderful beadwork and everything. And I said, oh my God, Barney, I want to go get Lieutenant Governor Dwyer on. And he was in another room. And I ran up to his honor, Lieutenant Governor Dwyer, and said, Barney Francis is here. Barney said, I'm too busy. Lieutenant Governor Dwyer said, I'm too busy. So he didn't get to see Barney Francis. And he got inducted that night, rightfully so. Now this is only the beginning of the story. When Barney died a few years ago, a few years after 1982, his burial was on Lennox Island, one of the 2 principal reserves on the island. And I was asked to do his eulogy. And I did his eulogy. And I want to tell you something about that eulogy. That must be me, or my heart. I was reading this eulogy on a beautiful summer day like today, more or less today, and I finished the eulogy, and all of a sudden from the west came an eagle, and it circled 3 times, and it flew back into the west. I had never really hardly ever seen an eagle on the island until that time. And there that eagle did that over Barney's funeral committal service. And a couple of years later, I was in Johnston's River with John Joe Sark at a sweat lodge. And as some of you may know, at a sweat lodge, the women pray to Mother Bald Eagle, and the men pray to Father Spotted Eagle. And John Joe said to me, John Joe was a real activist for the Mi'kmaq people. John Joe said, Wayne, wait till after the sweat lodge. An eagle will come up Johnson's River from the west, and he will circle the sweat lodge participants 3 times, and then that eagle will fly back into the west. And sure enough, an eagle did that very, very thing that day. 1985, I think it was. Now that is what I'm going to tell you today. My grandfather, and what I'm going to do today is I'm actually going to pass these around. You'll get a feeling for things, because as opposed to the screen show where people are looking up there at that, I want you to be considering me the center of your attention. I'm like Robert Frost. If I'm not the show, I do not go. Now, I only half mean that. I mean that a little bit. I want us all to be centered on what I'm going to tell you. But my grandfather, Albert E. Wright, was in that photograph that you're moving around. He worked here for 52 years in this building. He was the bookkeeper of Callback's General Store. My uncles and aunts all lived right over beside Ralph and Ruth Callback. They lived in a house that was right over there beside them. All of my uncles and aunts, my father, who's here, I might as well pass my father around now. Lorne Wright. And Lorne and Louis and Norman and Priscilla and Bertie and Bessie all worked here at this store, at this general store, the one that we're in right now. It's a museum now, but once upon a time it was a great general store. And I thought I wrote a pretty darn good history of a general store and a country merchant, Will Callback, Ralph Callback, Bill Callback, Catherine. But this store was so important to all of them. And I will tell a little story right now. For example, my father was a real joker. And that may be where I got some of my own anti-establishmentarian kind of bent. I am a bit bent, see. But basically, one time my father was hiding under the front porch here at the general store, and he tied Everett Bradshaw's new car, the bumper of his new car, to the posts of this general store. And of course, Everett took off, ripped the bumper off his car, and didn't do much damage to Callback's store. But he said, my God, I'm going to kill you. You know what the word's going to come next? I'm going to kill you, children. I'm going to kill you, kids. I'm going to kill you if I find you a phone. And Everett probably would have, if you knew Everett Bradshaw. But my father was a joker. And at one point, before Duke Nielsen was the great Santa Claus here, my father was Santa Claus here. He wouldn't be too old looking. What he liked to do is go up into the attic here, where they kept the Jersey milk chocolate bars, and he put the Jersey milk chocolate bars in there to kind of properly portray Santa. And then, when Santa was all done ministering to the wonderful little kids, my father would go home over to that building with the Jersey milk chocolate bars. But my father, in later years, he was a generous, wonderful man, and anybody with a disability, any kid, he'd say, "Chocobar, Lord, Chocobar." And they'd come into the Reed's Corner Esso, and my father would hand out a Milky Way bar or Wildfire bar or whatever to those kids, because my father, although he was a joker, and he would draw Nazi symbols on people's backs during the early years of the Year War. In 1940, when he went off to Holland and Belgium and France, and my mother was right here. She was the secretary of M.F. Skierman, the great M.F. Skierman Company, and she went off to the Canadian Navy, the Canadian Royal Navy. And among her many duties, she was a secretary to Colonel Ralston and all of those top bigwigs in Ottawa. And in one book I found on naval intelligence, Canadian naval intelligence, there's my mother over in the corner with a typewriter as they were doing their Canadian naval intelligence work. And intelligence means everything to me. I love spies, I love counterintelligence, and someday I hope to kind of use that as the backdrop of a great novel. I have hundreds of pages of that novel written, but I haven't done it yet. So, again, another thing that I'm going to do tonight, if you see this little kind of lithograph, I'll actually pass it around. Basically, story of the return of Michael Hill. Now, my actual maternal great-grandfather was Michael Hill. And what I'm going to try to do tonight, although I'm probably failing terribly, is to create the idea of a guy sitting over here in a Cracker Barrel, sneaking a cracker when Ralph wasn't looking, and another old hangers-on. They're kind of cutting off a little sliver from the cheese wheel in Ralph's store here, and they're all sitting around and they're talking and talking. I wanted to try to create that atmosphere tonight. I'm probably beginning to use these kind of tables in 1925 or 1935 or whatever. But I'm trying to catch your attention by being a storyteller tonight. I'm not going to be showing you too many actual artifacts of the other side. But I'm just going to put these in the mix here too. I'll just let these go around. That's me as a very young kid. Because now we move into the topics that we have at hand. Now I was hoping Ronnie Rayner would be here tonight, because Ronnie and I were at a Sons of the Pioneer concert a few years ago down in Charlottetown. And Ronnie said, you know what, Wayne? When we saw old guys with white hair, and we were, going to Athena or whatever, we said, oh my God, are they ever old? And now I'm one of those. I'm one of those old guys. But I think perpetually I shall always be this guy. This guy. First day of school, Wilmot Valley School. One room. I was little Wayne. In grade 8 there was Big Wayne. He was about 300 pounds. Wayne Marchbank. And he was big. I was little. I was the only one in grade 1. I liked it that way. I could sit there all day long, look out the windows, and look at the squirrels and things. And I said to myself tonight, if you've ever seen a Ken Burns documentary on jazz of Civil War, the secret of Ken Burns is to use traditional narrative, but also have first-person speaker. I am a first-person speaker. I'm not going to be telling you what I've dug up in a museum or what I've heard from somebody else. I'm going to be telling you tonight about all the crazy, wonderful, mysterious things that have happened to me over all these years. And the UFOs, I'll circulate these too. Again, here I was 7 years old, 5 years old in this picture, first day. But when I was about 7, I was walking up Fred Clark's Hill in Wilmot Valley, and I looked over my head, something said, look up. And there over my head was a torpedo-shaped spaceship, or whatever the heck it was. It was sort of wrapped in a mist, plasma or something, and it had several little funnels coming up the side. And there it was. I was looking at a UFO. And what that was, in the terminology of UFOs, and I'm going to show you all of these pictures later, that was what is called the mothership. The mothership, which is right there. There's a couple other motherships there too. When you study ufology, you'll realize that these motherships have many little scout ships that come out from either end. See, it's getting weird, right? Getting weird. I'll let that circulate. But I saw something like that when I was 7 years old, in the middle of the day, walking up Fred Clark's Hill. I don't know if anybody else saw it or not, or if it was just for me. But like Uri Geller in Israel, same age, went over his head. It changes your life forever. Some of you know what I'm talking about. When you see something like this, as real as this tape, you are going to be changed forever. And I will proceed. I had Ezekiel's wheel with me, a little diagram of it. Well, let's start with 1947. As some of you know, the UFO or flying saucer phenomenon began on June the 24th, 1947, in Washington State in the Cascade Mountains, when this particular businessman sold fire extinguishers. He was looking for a lost transport plane, but he saw nine little objects skipping through the mountains. He measured their speed from mountain to mountain, so he knew they were traveling 1,200 miles per hour. And he said, when he got back to Boise, Idaho, I'll just swing those around. He said they were like saucers skipping on water. And from that moment, the media picked up the word flying saucer. That's where we get the word flying saucer. Now, let's take a few days more, and we get to July the 3rd. This is Brenton Clark from Augustine Cove on the southern shore of PEI. Dilbert gave me his picture. July the 3rd, 1947, Brenton was out farming, just farming, and farmers on PEI are quite aware what is an aircraft with regular propulsion systems and wings and everything. And he saw, flying over his farm, this circular disc. I guess I must show you this. He saw like a circular disc flying over slowly, going to the southwest, heading to the southwest. And Brenton Clark, let you feel that picture, it's great. So July the 3rd, you know something else happened on July the 3rd. It was called Roswell, New Mexico. And 14 states and provinces reported seeing UFOs that day heading to the southwest. 14 states and provinces. One of them was Prince Edward Island. Not only was Brenton Clark seeing it, but Dr. C.K. Gunn of the experimental Fox station in Summerside saw it. And 4 or 5 other people saw this little silver disc moving across the sky. They're quite aware of all the airplanes at RSA at Summerside. And they knew this was kind of a little aberrant. And so I seen the report go right to the High Command in Ottawa about this disc on July the 3rd, 1947. And as you may know, some of you may know, on July the 3rd, roughly speaking around then, we never quite know, Mac Brazel was out with his sheep, and he saw all of the debris from this crashed UFO. There were several crashed UFOs. People don't know this. Several ones around Arizona here and there. It seemed that there was a policy of directing radar or whatever towards them, and they were crashing them intentionally to kind of determine their whole get up and go. I'll also put this little cartoon I published in the newspaper. I'll let this flip around here. So, we have Brenton. Now we move on to something very intriguing. In 1966, on September the 21st, the Argus had just come over here from Greenwood. It was a new kind of reality for Summerside to have the Argus aircraft with its great big sub-detection mechanism on it. And on that morning of September 21st, they were refueling this Argus, 10 of them. There was pilots, there was the crew. And all of a sudden, very early in the morning, like 6 a.m., this disc came right over RCA Summerside. They reported it to the Journal Pioneer. You can read it. Gene will help you find that particular microfilm. And that disc came right down about 10 feet above the ground, and the 10 of them stupefied by it, watching it, and then took off. The intriguing part about that story is that about 30 minutes earlier in Burton, in West Prince, two fishermen were fishing, and they reported to the Journal Pioneer, they saw a disc, a flying saucer, what they called a really bright-looking star, traveling towards Summerside. This corroborates that story like crazy. And there you have that reality. Men who used the sea and worked the land saw these things. They are real, they were real, whatever reality means, and they saw them. I'll let that go around. There's another UFO to throw in there, the 1990 Ebenezer UFO. Now, here's another very famous picture. I'm probably just eating up my time like crazy, I see it. This is the most beautiful pictures I've ever seen, almost, are McMinnville, Oregon, in 1950. Again, a farmer, Paul Trent, out there in Oregon, snapped this picture. He ran into the house. His wife had seen them. She was hanging clothing on a line, and she saw this thing coming over their farm. So he ran in, got his little, probably Kodak, Grammy camera or something, and he snapped the famous picture of McMinnville, Oregon. Now that'll work its way around to you. Again, UFOs. Intriguing about UFOs, when you do see them, sometimes there's a distortion in one side of them. Because we know from Einstein that if you want to travel near the speed of light, you take up a tremendous amount of energy. And the mass is disfigured. And so you can see that disfiguration on one side of, this is from a film, a video, a distortion on one side, it's all blunted. And here's the sharp side. Because there's such a tremendous electromagnetic disturbance going on in the air around these craft, and they are craft. This is a man here called Donald Keogh. And Donald Keogh was a Marine pilot. I'm kind of a Navy, call it Navy pilot for the Marines. And so basically he was so disgusted with the cover-up that he perceived in the military that he started an institution called NICAP, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. And so Donald Keogh in the 50s was a great crusader. I joined NICAP in 1975 or so. Can't remember the year exactly, 75 or 76. And so for a year or so, I would be roaming around the Maritimes and talking to people about their sightings. You could have people, a whole family, watching Hockey Night in Canada, and they would come out and see this thing over the highway, all hovering with many, many lights, and the man would say, "I don't think I'm long for this world," when they were coming back. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, he died of cancer. Again, another heavyweight of ufology is Stanton Friedman. Some of you know this name. I don't say any of my UFO type people here, but this is Stanton Friedman. He was a nuclear physicist, and he was the man who really revealed Roswell to the world. He lived in Fredericton. I was the first person he wrote when he got here, and I met him in Charlottetown. But Stanton Friedman wrote the great books on Roswell. He interviewed a couple of hundred people who all swore on affidavits that they were warned if they revealed what they had seen, like little bodies or this or that they would wind up with their bones being picked clean in the desert. That's the story of Roswell. I was not at Roswell, and so I can't really corroborate that part, but I can corroborate Stanton Friedman. No big deal. Now here we have Barney and Nettie Hill, and they are quite near Mount Washington in New Hampshire, when they had their famous abduction case happen. Think of it as you will. I'm just putting this towards you, because I actually have a photograph, and all the hundreds of photographs of UFOs from Mount Washington in 1878. 1878, and there in the picture, in 1878, a cameraman took a picture of this cigar-shaped thing wrapped in clouds, plasma, whatever. Now, what do we think of it all? Do we think that these wonderful aliens, there is a whistleblower that suggests that NATO wrote a report. They had so much trouble with all of these craft coming from Russia, going over Europe, that they had to do something or else there'd be a third world war. So they basically said, well, let's examine this. And NATO created a report above cosmic top secret. This sounds crazy and wonky, but basically that there were 85 species at least visiting the world. Again, I don't know that. I have never seen a species. But again, after Roswell, Robert Oppenheimer and Albert Einstein did get invited to go to New Mexico to view the bodies from the Roswell crash. I know it sounds crazy, but the important thing, there's a wonderful interview by Dr. Shirley Wright, who was Albert Einstein's pet at Princeton University, and she went with Albert Einstein and she viewed the bodies, and you can hear that report if you go on the internet. It's not inflammatory or dramatic. She matter-of-factly talks about seeing the little bodies from Roswell, New Mexico. Now, do we think of them as benign, wonderful, Californian-looking aliens? Or do we think of them as being the creepy ones, the grays, or whatever you want to call them? You can probably see these, so I don't even have to circulate these. That's as creepy as it gets tonight, actually. And here is a man called Richard Byrd. Admiral Richard Byrd was the most decorated military man in the United States. He was a famous explorer who in 26 and 28, 19, flew over the North Pole and the South Pole, the very first aviator to fly over the North and South Pole. And in his diaries, he talks about going through a hole in the Antarctic and visiting in the hollow earth that he recorded, a wonderful Shangri-La type of a place. And that is Admiral Richard Byrd. He was in charge of Operation High Jump, which had about 200 or 300 men, lots of ships and lots of planes, and they went to the Antarctic in 1946. And he reported this back to the Pentagon or whatever, and he was, of course, dismissed, thought of as gone over the wall, over the end. And so Admiral Richard Byrd, it even gets weirder. In 1971, I was working in Borden, Carleton, I like to call it Borden, at the Travel Bureau. I had 23 girls working. Not working for me. I was one of the 24 people. Luckily, I was a good liberal, and Gilbert Clements hired us all. And so, but there I was, 23 wonderful girls. And we had to work 2 o'clock at night sometimes to get all the people that were flooding into the island at night over the summer, all the wonderful tourists. And so at 2 o'clock one night, this desperate kind of people, an older man and his much older mother, Margaret Byrd Rawson, and his name was Philip Rawson, and I got them a place somewhere on the island with the little 2-way radios we had. And he said, Wayne, that was wonderful. And he took me flying. My first flying experience was with the great-nephew of Admiral Richard Byrd. Bananas, isn't it? It's just crazy. I met Farley Boat. That's wonderful, too. But there I was flying around in a little Piper Cub around the island with the great-nephew of Admiral Richard Byrd on postage stamps. He had so many medals, you wouldn't believe it. I'll also now, to lighten up the situation, I'm really flying into my other time. These are just funny cartoons that have fun with this idea. You've got to have fun with this idea of UFOs visiting the Earth, because you can't encompass it, can you guys? I'll even give you some more to percolate around. So what I'm going to do now, I think I better do it, finally. We'll get into some other great things going on here. I think ghosts, I'll quickly do some quick ghosts. I got to do really some fast ghosts here. Now, Jean's pretty familiar with Holman Homestead. Thankfully, people saved that wonderful building. Started in 1853, 54. A big, you might know it as Holman's Ice Cream Parlor now, but it was saved. It was saved through the work of Ken and Jenny Meister, two Mormon people that have come here. And I could tell you a story about Ken Meister and UFOs, but I won't even do that. But the Meisters saved Holman Homestead, and I was working there in 85, 86 or something. I was given the job of creating an International Fox Hall of Fame by the Canada Fox Breeders Association. And so there I was. I was living in Trappo, believe it or not, many, many miles away. I said, okay, this is no good. I better start sleeping right at the Holman Homestead if I'm going to get this done by, July the 1st. So one night, as I had my little supper, my little snack, I'm walking up the back stairway where the maids would go and the other people would go up in the Holman big mansion, the big Holman Homestead. I was walking up the back stairway, and ahead of me was a little woman, and I could see every flower. She was a full-body apparition, ghost. I saw this little lady walking up ahead of me as I went up to the upstairs to go to sleep. And I swear, as I said, my grandfather, I didn't bring his Bible tonight because it's too fragile. It was even dated from the Magdalen Islands. He was there in 1898. And he came over here in 1899. He was a master tailor, and he worked with William Callbeck in William Callbeck's tailor shop. And I didn't bring his Bible, but this is my Bible, and I swear to you, I saw a ghost. A ghost, and I never felt more honored in my life to see an actual ghost, because what does that tell you? It tells you, for me, that with God, all things are possible. There are such things as ghosts. Now this is where we get controversial, because I'll let this circulate around here. It's a little cartoon about ghosts and ghost walks, which Jean knows about well, ghost walks. But basically, what I was trying to communicate to you was the fact that ghosts are not what they seem. There was a little lady walking up the stairway. She was a very, very short little lady, maybe 60, 50, 70, I don't know, maybe 50. Walking up the back stairway, I could see her legs, her dress, her back of her head. And many years later, I met a woman called Anne McEwen, a wonderful woman who was involved with saving children and refugees around the world. And she said, and I told her that story for some reason, she was trying to save the Coleman grist mill. And then anyway, I told her this story, and she said, oh, that was my great-grandmother, Emma Jane Moyle, you saw. You saw Emma Jane Moyle, my great-grandmother. She was a little maid that came from Ireland, that the Holman family, of course our great mercantile princes here on the island, the Holmans, and they brought her over from Ireland, maybe Dublin, maybe Cork, who knows. And they brought her over, and she worked there. And did I see her? I think not. Because basically, what I think, and I've talked to people about this, lots of people. One of them was George Vandeman, the head of the Adventist Church. And he said that wasn't Emma Jane Moyle. What you saw was an impersonator. And I tend to think that completely to be the case. We do not see Emma Jane Moyle walking up to the stairway. We see something impersonating Emma Jane Moyle, because that phenomenon, whatever it is, wants us to think certain things. And when Jesus said in the Bible, the dead know nothing, don't even worry about the dead know nothing, you have to imagine that what you're seeing was not Emma Jane Moyle, but something impersonating Emma Jane Moyle. And what I have found in my own reading was that one of these people who can astral project, they did that once with a ghost. They went around to the other side of the ghost, and it was just like papier-mâché. It was all real on this side, but on this side it was just hollow. Like, I don't know, like a fortune cookie. So they are a construct of our own energy and of something called the elemental spirits of this world. Remember those eagles? Everything in this world seems to have a spirit. The Mi'kmaq would call it Great Spirit. It's their analog to God, to Jehovah, the Great Spirit. But they said, this stone has something of a spirit. Eagles have something of a spirit. Little chickadees that they'd eat, or robins that they'd eat, they all have spirits. And they respect that. And that's what happens with ghosts. You are seeing something that the universe is trying to tell you. And I don't know what it is. But as Jean Cocteau said, only a dull simpleton would come up with an idea as an explanation for these things, like a weather balloon or mirage or hallucination. Only a dull simpleton would say that, instead of realizing the universe was trying to say something to you. And that's what happens when you see crop circles. I've been to crop circles. They are something that the universe is trying to tell you. Now, let's get into another ghost. This is really neat. I was doing my academic doctoral thing at the University of New Brunswick. But 1975, 76, I lived across the St. John River. I would walk across the railway bridge to UNB each day. I'd go to my little place called Barker's Point, and I'd go to my little apartment. I never roamed around. I wasn't a party animal. But one night, 2:30 at night, my doorbell rang. My doorbell rang downstairs. Doorbell's ringing, 2:30 at night. I think nothing of it. I go down, nothing, snow, nothing, no footprints, no nothing. Just a little doorbell has rung. I go to the university the next day. You can put any of those, okay, that's great. I went to the university the next day, and all my faculty, graduate, doctoral student type people, they all were all gloomy and sad. You didn't hear what? You didn't hear. You didn't hear. I said, what do you mean? I was all coming in all jolly. It's like, only Mr. Bean could come in and talk to them like that. Be all jolly and crazy, all joking around, and everybody, a long face. And they said, didn't you hear? 2 people died last night in a dormitory fire. One of them was Pauline Lester, a fellow doctoral student. And they said, Pauline left something for you. I said, what time was the fire? 2:30 in the night, the fire was. They said, Pauline wrote this poem for you, Wayne. And so Pauline wrote me a poem. The first line says it all. She just wasn't her type. He just wasn't her type. She just wasn't his type. And so what I have received at 2:30 that night was something contacting me. And was it Pauline Lester, who was dying? She's a compulsive smoker. Smoking. She must have been smoking in bed and died that night at 2:30 a.m. And she apparently was making honey in her heart for me. She, all attracted to me. Can you believe it? Yes. Anyway, I was pretty handsome. No, I wasn't. But Pauline, at 2:30 that night, died in a fire. I'll tell you some more things. I don't have much time left. I gotta fly. I'm even more hardly get into Sasquatches.
Don't worry.
Okay, don't worry.
Don't worry.
Best word I ever heard. Best word I ever heard. My father, I was over in Valentia Island in Ireland in 1975. I loved all the little islands of Western Ireland. Doug Sobey, he's an Irishman, to some degree. Fair weather Irishman. No, he loves Ireland, he knows Ireland. Maybe better than me, maybe in some ways not. I was over in Valentia Island in the west of Ireland, and I was sleeping over there in the hostel, and I had this dream. My mother, father, and I were eating watermelons. My mother's watermelon was all wonderful and pink. Everything was fine. My father's watermelon had all these little black things moving all around, moving all around inside the watermelon in my dream. I get a call from the hostel keeper. He said, Wayne, you've got to go to the post office. That's where the only phone was in those days. go to the post office. There's a transatlantic call for you. So I go to the call, to the little phone, and I say, hi, Mom, Mom. She said, you gotta come home, your father's really, really sick. Your father's really sick. So I come home, and for the next year, probably, and so, my father died of cancer, shrunk from a nice big size, healthy man of 57, 58. He shrunk down to about 67 pounds, and he died. When he died, you know, the cancer was so horrible, the morphine did nothing. Said, Wayne, cut a hole in me so I can pee. He couldn't even do anything. And he died in March of 1976. And as I was driving home from the Prince Edward Island Hospital where he had died, in a little Ford truck, little white truck, that my father had gotten from D.L. at McDonald's. He hated Fords. My father hated Fords. And he knew cars, he was a great mechanic. But anyway, I'm driving home in the little white truck. My father had just died. And I said to myself, what does a son do when a father dies? Do they throw stones on the grave? And at that very moment, on Route 225, a stone came off the road and cracked the windshield of the little white Ford truck. That's fine. That's fine. That's pretty weird, but it's fine. What gets even weirder, for the next 2 weeks, my mother and I, living at Reed's Corner in the service station that my father had bought for $25 and made into our first house, we would hear the phone ringing, but it wasn't a ring like a normal phone rings. It was just like a couple of AA batteries. We'd go to the phone, pick it up, nobody there, never anybody there. That went on for 2 weeks. That's called the phantom phone call. And so we experienced that. And so again, what's going on? Everything's wonderful. Here's my father's notepad from the service station. You can check the number on it. I sound like the Amazing Question right now. Check it out. Is that an ace of 7? Ace of spades? But basically, my father's phone number in those days was 911. 911. And sometimes just for the fun of it, he'd say, not Reed's Corner, I saw. He'd say, Duffy's Tavern, Duffy's Tavern. Now let's go back to the UFO of 1966. I was working for my father at the service station. I was useless. I could only run out. I'd run out 100 miles an hour, Gene, and I'd pump gas. I'd run back. Nobody could. Ben Johnson couldn't go faster than I could. I was great at gas. I had a whole collection of little gas caps from cars because I couldn't remember to put the car, those little Ramblers or Cadillacs, whatever, I couldn't remember to put them back. So I had a whole lot of Massachusetts, California, the gas caps in the stock room at the Reed's Corner. But this is where it gets really weird. About the time that the UFO almost landed at RCS Summerside, that was a summer I was working there, and guess what happened? A car came in to get gas. That's fine, a car comes in to get gas all the time. But this car had 6 men in black. They were all short, stocky. If you remember the Hollywood actor Oscar Homolka, it was Oscar Homolka times 6. 6 little men, 6 men, not little, big stocky men in a kind of a Lada-looking car, and they came in to get gas. And guess what they asked me? Where is the RCS Summerside Air Base? And I told them, I said, it's that way, you go there, you turn there. And they said, okay. And they left. And the 6 men in black, they headed to RCS Summerside about the same time that the flying saucer had hovered over the airbase. That's not all of the story. About 1/2 minute later, another car pulls up behind them. They're gone. Pulls up to get gas. It is 6 RCMP officers in the car. 6 in the car, 6 of them. And they wanted to know who they were, what they looked like, what did they want. They got the credit card slip that I had, registered for the 6 East European type people. And they took off after the East European car. Now, isn't that amazing? I think that's pretty fantastic. And so there I have, at the very, very moments that the little flying saucer hovered over the airbase. And when you study ufology, you will realize that UFOs are basically have been reported over every airbase, not only in North America, but in the world. They've surveilled them. I don't know if there were nuclear tipped things at Summerside in 1966. It's a possibility. You do not know what the military is doing. But in any event, let's go on to a new thing. Let's go on to something really nice. I love Ireland. Doug loves Ireland. I've never been in Northern Ireland. I've lived in Donegal a lot. And I could see the kids coming in when Battle of the Boyne Day was happening. And their eyes were as big as saucers. They wanted to get away from the Troubles. I was there right in the middle of the Troubles in 1975. And I saw all of that. But there's something about Ireland that's pretty darn wonderful. And one day as I was hitchhiking around Ireland, I don't know if you've ever been to Inishmore in the Aran Islands. In the west of Ireland, in Galway Bay, are the Aran Islands. And there is such a thing called a ring fort. Can you see a ring fort there? Can you see a kind of a ring assembly? And the ring fort, and I said, okay, I'll leave the hostel, I'm going to go to that ring fort. This ancient ring fort. And I'm going to look down over the cliff because the ring fort is built like a semicircle. And you look down over the cliff, and you see seagulls way down there, thousands of feet down. And all of a sudden, as I was looking down, all of a sudden, all these little hands started hitting me, pounding into me. I swear again on the Bible, this was happening. I did not know that ring forts, rings, were so associated with the shining ones, the she, the little people, the leprechauns, all that stuff. You can see circular things all over Ireland. People don't even plant anything in the side. You don't go in and chop that tree down. If you do, bad things will happen to you. So there are such things as not being respectful of the shining ones, the people that were really giants at one point, but then were changed because of conditions into tiny little people. And they lived in that other netherworld, underneath the ground or wherever you consider it, another dimension. I'll pass that around. It's quite an interesting story. I did not know about ring forts when I encountered all of those little things. But I do know that there's a phenomenon in Ireland that along the coast of Ireland, the west coast, when people stop their buses, and every couple of weeks, somebody doesn't get back to the bus. They don't come back to the bus, they're missing. Oh, suicide, suicide, suicide. I'm talking 100 people in the past 20 years. Just they don't get back to the bus. They go to the edges of these cliffs and they don't come back. I don't know why, but that may be something to think about. Let me see. Do we have time? I'm running. Oh, while I'm in Ireland, I was extremely lucky in Ireland. I was hitchhiking around. One time, I got a drive. You see, you go into Lucan outside of Dublin, and then you start hitchhiking. And I was hitchhiking to get to Galway or wherever, and I got a drive of two old people. I'm really old. 80. They must have been 80. I don't even talk about what 80 means now. But in those days, these two old people, and they said, I'm Dr. Quinn, and his name was Dr. Quinn, and his wife's name was Dr. Quinn. They were both gynecologists. They were heading probably to Dunquin, or the ancestral seat of the Quinns. But basically he said, oh, well, what do you do, Wayne? And I said, oh, back home I've written some poetry. Oh, we're going to take you to Sligo, the home of William Butler Yeats. And they were so old, they referred to him as Master Willie. And here's a man, William Butler Yeats, who died in 1939, I think it was, and they knew him as Master Willie. My God, they took me all around Sligo, and they showed me all kinds of strange, mystical things about Sligo in the west of Ireland. That's fine, that's pretty wonderful, but I can tell you another story, and it is the time I was in Dublin, 1975, Eamon de Valera had died, and there was a big funeral for Eamon de Valera, the great president, Prime Minister of Ireland. But I was walking around Ireland one day, Dublin. I'm walking around Dublin, I was on Lyon Street, it's called Lyon, L-Y-O-N, and I said, gee, I think I'll buy a bar of lemon soap in this shop. So I went into Sweeney's chemist's shop, Sweeney's, and I said, I'd like to buy a bar of lemon soap. And they said, oh, you must be one of those Americans on the James Joyce tour. I said, I don't know what you mean. I had never read Ulysses, the novel Ulysses at that point. Never even thought about it. And they said, well, because on this day, on June the 4th, 1904, Leopold Bloom came into the store and buys a bar of lemon soap. It's a parody of Ulysses, to the great epic by Homer. And Leopold Bloom, wandering around Ireland, wandering around Dublin, basically Dublin, in one day, 24 hours, and doing all of these strange things. And I said, no, I've never read Ulysses. She couldn't believe me, but there I have a case of James Joyce even contacting me. That gets pretty good. I got Emma Jane Moyle contacting me. I've got Admiral Richard Byrd contacting me. I've got Jean McKay contacting me. But there I have James Joyce, Jimmy Joyce. Later I would do little courses on James Joyce because I love James Joyce. But at that point I had never read Ulysses, and I didn't know what Leopold Bloom had done. And think of all the drugstores in Dublin. Maybe there's 500, I don't know. And I go into that particular one to buy a bar of lemon soap. I don't, it's crazy. It's crazy, it's utterly wild. Let's get into some monsters. Let's get into some monsters. We have another 2 hours left. I love monsters. I look in the mirror and sometimes I see a monster. Let's just talk about sea serpents first. Sea monsters. Then we'll get to Sasquatches, which are even more interesting. But the world's most famous monster, oh, I've got two cases of him, is, of course, the Loch Ness Monster. And his many, many sisters and brothers around the world in all of these deep water lakes. In 1978, I was over there with a girlfriend, Nettie, and we went, Nettie stayed home, but I went and sat by Loch Ness for about 10 hours straight, just sitting there by Loch Ness. And all of a sudden, do you think I saw the Loch Ness Monster? This Harrier jet, this big RAF jet, flew over just about 10 feet above me, 1,000 miles an hour. I had never seen Loch Ness Monster, but what I have done, I've talked to people who have seen the sea monster, and they have seen him right here in the island, off the island. And one of them is Fred Livingston. He's at West Point. I went to see Fred Livingston at West Point, and he took me down to the shore and said, Wayne, this is the spot where I saw his head come up, like a, horse. And he said, I shot at him, and he just disappeared. He just exploded, or he probably didn't see what happened. But he shot right at his head, and he swore that he hit him. But he said, Wayne, it's a funny thing. The sea monsters that we see in Northumberland Strait now are much smaller since they built the bridge. He said they're smaller now. And he told me about how they were little babies and they live here and there. That's fine. That's fine. A guy called Harvey Stewart, some of you might know Harvey Stewart, Trent River Industries. He was out in Drumheller or Medicine Hat or somewhere. He was at a museum, or he was in actual fossil area, and he saw fossils of the plesiosaurus. And the plesiosaurus, I'll throw that into the mixture there. The plesiosaurus certainly seems to be an archetype for the sea serpents that we see from Lake Okanagan to Lake Champlain to Lake Baikal, you name it. They're strange creatures that seem like a vestige of the Ice Age, a survivor of the Ice Age. And maybe they are, and maybe they're not. Because the thing about all of these cryptids, these strange creatures, they have an awful strange habit of when you're photographing, they suddenly fade away and disappear. Here's another sea serpent that was encountered on a transatlantic kind of marathon rowing expedition by two sailors. That was just an artist's rendition. But the thing was, I have never seen the sea serpent, but others have. And I've talked to other fishermen who have seen this sea serpent. What do you make of it? Let's even think about something else called the Sasquatchy. The Sasquatch is pretty neat. I have talked to people here on the island who have seen Sasquatches. They've seen them on Hog Island, Bird Island. They've seen them on Lennox Island. And they've seen them. They've seen them. Yes. Maybe they were drinking, maybe they weren't drinking that night. No, I'm not even kidding. Sometimes when terrible things happen in a community, that's where the Sasquatches seem to appear. So if there's a murder or a suicide or something, Sasquatches appear. Now the native people of our continent and of our globe have reported the hairy man, the Sasquatch, for thousands of years. I can only say that I've talked to the leading Bigfoot hunters in the world. I've talked to some of them, I've not talked to all of them. I've talked to two of them, John Green in BC, Lauren Coleman in Maine. So they are people that kind of study the phenomenon, and they talk to people who've seen the Sasquatches. And this is an interesting picture here, because you're never the same after this happens to you. And I'll just show you this picture here. Gene, I'll let you circulate that in a counterclockwise fashion. I have seen, and I've talked to them, people that were the biggest, toughest hunters in the world. We're talking 250-pound outdoorsmen, grizzled. They'll cry when they tell you what they see. They see a 9-foot, 8-foot, 10-foot creature walking. They see it. They hear his roar going through their body. Like I've heard the lions roar in Kenya and Uganda. I was even in Kenya one time in a little bus, and the guy said, you know what I've got here? I've got the sound box of a lion. The lion can be heard for miles, 5-10 miles away. The sound box, he was going to sell that for $10,000 to some crazy collector of things. But the Sasquatch is a very interesting thing, because in all of these cases of the paranormal, the phenomenon controls every condition possible. It could be the sound, it could be the scent, it could be everything. It controls it. And not only is it a sentient intelligence, it's precognitive. It knows what you're going to do before you do it. And that's from Skinwalker Ranch to whatever, you name it. The Olympia Peninsula in Washington State. Just these creatures can control the reality. All the insects are quiet, all the birds are quiet. There's an altered state of reality, and then these creatures appear. Here's a man here. This is an old famous case of a man who was kidnapped by Bigfoot, a family of Bigfoot, and held for several days with a family of Bigfoot. Now, what do you think of Bigfoot? Do you think Bigfoot could happen here? You say, well, what would he eat? He needs to eat an awful lot of foliage. Like a gorilla in Uganda, you've got to eat a lot of stuff. Obviously, they live in two worlds, the Mi'kmaq or the Dakota or the Lakota or whatever would say. They live in two worlds. They live in our world, and they can make footprints on the ground, but at other times, they're not even there. You can't see them. It is said by some people that the little baby Sasquatches will go up to somebody walking, and they go like that because they know the person the person can't see the Sasquatches. They can't see them. They just can't see them. And they'll play with you and they'll do that. I've had one experience, too, with Bigfoot, I think. One was in Whistler, BC. My daughter Maya was working out there. She's now in Australia. But she said, okay, we're going to Harrison Hot Springs. We're going to go to different places. And we were in Whistler, BC, in a hotel, a Sundial Hotel. In the middle of the night, I heard the two biggest whoop, whoop, that you'd ever want to hear. Nobody else heard them. But there were two of them, and they were for me. That I was the only one that could hear them. Yes, I'm certifiably insane. But other than that, I was the only one that could hear these two great big. I've never heard anything like it. And this is in the middle of Whistler, a pretty busy little resorts town. And then I hear these two little things. At another point, my wife Kelly and I, and maybe Ty, we rented a cottage in the middle of the woods in Nova Scotia. And I swear to God, it was the most crazy experience. All of us, walking through the woods, we could feel that something was watching us the whole time. We were completely unsettled, and in the cottage, we stayed there, we were completely unsettled. And I asked Kelly today, I said, Kelly, can you recall that experience? And she said, yeah. And that's the only time I've ever felt something was watching me and watching me and watching me. They tend to, in Bigfoot lore, walk alongside of you. If you're walking along a certain trail, they'll walk along in there about 20 feet in. And they're just walking, they're quiet, and they walk alongside of you. And that, to me, may have been a Bigfoot experience. Because there is a man in Shelburne, Nova Scotia, who has photographed Bigfoot many, many times. So they can appear in Nova Scotia. And as I said, Eugene Peters, John Peters have told me they have seen Bigfoot. And Eugene just died. Go back to Eugene for a moment. One time Eugene told me, he's a Mi'kmaq, of course. He told me, Wayne, we were watching TV one night on Lennox Island here. We were watching Bonanza. Oh, remember Lauren Green, Michael Landon. Watching Bonanza about 5:30. And all of a sudden, screens kept going like that, screen. And they all ran out of their houses on Lennox Island, and they saw 4 UFOs. Like in a kind of like Oreo cookie fashion, just go over Lennox Island. I've talked to other people about this. George Reed, very nice, wonderful man who lived in Borden. He said, Wayne, one time I was watching TV and all the power went out in Borden. Everybody's power went out. And of course he went out and he saw a UFO flying over Borden. What does this mean? Is George Reed crazy? Is he hallucinating? I think not. I think the phenomenon is something that is localized and perhaps personalized, but I think that it does happen to people, and it's meaningful. It can be psychological, but it's, at the same time, it's physical. And there are real radar soundings, and there are real ground reports, there are radio activity, encounters, and so all of these things have happened to people, and they are real. And yet, are they real? Or do we live in a complementarity where they're real, like a wave at one point, and they're a particle at another point? We're living in a quantum universe where two things can be true at the very same time. I think that what we have in this world is a world of wonders. And I came here tonight to tell you about some of the wonders that I've encountered. I could talk to you about, I got some backup wonders, by the way. Backup wonders. There's no end to the wonders. Oh, I'll just throw some crazy things towards you. Crazy things. 9/11. Great day in our minds, and just like JFK, that's another story. At the art college in Halifax, I had a girlfriend, Terrell, a girlfriend. Anyway, what do you mean into that? But Terrell said, my father, hold on. I shook hands with John Kennedy that day. Terrell said, her father, Max Seltzer, was the Democratic Committee Chairman for Dallas. I checked that out, he was. So on that day, in 1963, Terrell shook John Kennedy's hand. You all remember, I think you're all old enough to remember, almost all of you, what you were doing that day. And what an immense kind of conspiracy it has engendered. But take 9/11. Can you believe that this cartoon, which I published in their Journal Pioneer, I published that in the Journal Pioneer a few days after the event. It was Tuesday that this cartoon, this one I'm holding in my hand, was on the David Letterman show and the Jay Leno show. Can you believe it? Because on Tuesday, Jay Leno and David Letterman had recovered enough, they didn't know what to do with this 3,000 people being killed and more people dying every month from the fallout from these Twin Towers. That this cartoon that I did here in Summerside, they were making it into t-shirts on the streets of New York City that week and selling them. Can you believe that? This is 2001. We were already living in a global village by 2001. So what I did, I had Twin Towers, but in my case, I had firefighters and police officers as the Twin Towers. And there was David Letterman, little tears coming out of his eyes, not crocodile tears, but real ones, because the United States had just encountered something on its own home soil, something terrible, and something not only terrible, perhaps criminal and evil and diabolical, that maybe, just maybe, this particular attack on the trade towers, World Trade Towers in New York City, was an event that was hijacked by a secret group of people that said, we want to create a new Pearl Harbor. And certainly to God, a new Pearl Harbor was created in 2001, and a new war on terrorism, in this case, was devised. So I do not know any more than that, but that is the story of Twin Towers. I think we'll take Fire in the Sky. This is intriguing, this is funny. Fire in the Sky. I had the chance to meet Travis Walton last year at the Shag Harbor Festival. But of course, my dog of 10 years, on that very day that I go to meet Travis Walton, the guy in Snowflake, Arizona in 1975, who said he was abducted by aliens, that very day my dog becomes terribly sick. We're going back and forth to the vet college, and I don't get to meet Travis Walton, which is fine. But Travis Walton said he was kidnapped in plain view of his 5 friends in the truck. They're forestry workers in Snowflake, Arizona. And he was abducted. And the movie that they made of the story was called Fire in the Sky. Last year, I was given the job of being the storyteller at Fire in the Kitchen. Fire in the Kitchen is at the Gaelic, the College of Piping here in Summerside. And so I was the storyteller. My problem was that I only had 2 minutes per story, and this girl, Tanya Gallant, starts playing the keyboard. Oh yeah, it's Bud from the Great Red. I could not get going. I ran for politics in 2014. I ran for Wilmot. And there I was, up on the stage at Uptech Center. Everybody was given 2 minutes, all the councillor candidates. And I was just getting into talking about collecting grasshoppers in Bill Lafergie's field. That's how long it took me to get going, to tell the people, vote for me, vote for Wayne Wright for city council. So I can't get going in 2 minutes. And so Peter Glenn did not get me to come back to Fire in the Kitchen this year, because I think in many cases I was a complete and utter mess. I'd start to tell the story and all the God, what a format. I said, Peter, this is crazy. I've been a complete failure. I'm telling these ghost stories, and sea serpent stories, and UFO stories, and I get 2 minutes to do them. And suddenly, somebody's saying, oh, are y'all having a good time? Are y'all having a great time? Oh my God. So don't ever do that. This is a better format. 8:15, I'm still going. And there's no end. Oh, I can talk. This is an interesting story. This is the Wilmot Valley Veterans. This is a crazy story. This is my mother. She had just, left Scammons, and she joined the Women's Royal Canadian Naval Service, Audrey Clark Wright. My father and her were married about 1942, and of course they both go off. My father to Holland and Belgium and England, France, and my mother from Vancouver to St. John's. And they didn't see each other for 4 years. But in any case, here's the Wilmot Valley veterans. Now this is where it gets really strange. As if I haven't been strange enough tonight. This is my mother. And this man right here is Ralph Clark. Different kind of band of the Clark family. But Ralph Clark was her fellow veteran in the Second World War. Many years later, I was at UNB, as I've already said, and I saw this girl with flaming red hair, flaming curly red hair, and we became really close friends, and we were together for a few years, and her name was Nettie Clark. But because she had an E on the end of her name, I never thought much of it. She was from New Glasgow. But ultimately, she told me, oh, that's my father. That's my father, Ralph Clark. And so when I saw my UFO on Fred Clark's Hill, remember? I saw my UFO on Fred Clark's Hill. Meddy, her name was Meddy. She said, I'm going to tell you something, Wayne. You see, we would come home every summer from New Glasgow to Wilmot Valley. And we would go to Fred Clark's Hill, where the Clarks lived. And she said, one time, when I was a little girl, I looked in the ditch beside Fred Clark's Hill, and I saw this great big light in the ditch. Figure that out. I live with a girl whose father was a veteran, and my mother right there, a veteran of the war. And Ralph Clark went to New Glasgow, married a McLeod girl, a lady, and we later, Nettie and I went to Dunvegan Castle and the Isle of Skye and all that stuff. But there, why would I kind of be living with a girl whose father was a Wilmot Valley soldier? I don't know what's going on. And of course, Nettie went on to write several books on the paranormal herself in Nova Scotia. She wrote all those Blue Nose type things. And when we were together, I remember one time I was investigating a UFO in Garlock Lake in Nova Scotia, and she froze. She said, I'm going up there. It was in a cemetery, and I said, I want to go to the cemetery where they saw the UFO. No, no, no. She froze. She wouldn't move. But there I was living with this red-haired girl. Speaking of red-haired girls, I didn't bring, Charlie, I talked about Charlie Brown for a minute, but I did write to Charles Schultz before he died. But again, there I was with a red-haired girl. But my grandmother was Ruth Elizabeth Durant, and she married my grandfather, Al Clark. And at the age of 28, she was engaged in childbirth, and of course, a tipsy doctor, a country doctor, came to the little house in Margate, and my mother was 8 years old at the time. And so there was my grandmother, my mother's mother, in a casket on a kitchen table in Margate, and they were all around on the sad, sad occasion, October the 2nd, 1928. And all of a sudden, on the walls of the house, and my mother ran to the door, nobody there, nobody there. That's called a forerunner? No, might be, who knows what that is. But that's another thing that Scottish people particularly have encountered over the years on this island, is these phenomena where loud noises appear, something tells you before it happens, it's going to happen. Again, in every case, the phenomenon is controlling everything. It knows what you're going to do before you do it, and it rushes out to you and tells you something. Now, here's backtracking like crazy right now. All funny things. Here's another cartoon. I don't know if that's gone around. But again, take that Sasquatch for a minute. In Darnley, PEI here, in fact in other parts of this island, over the centuries, giant skeletons have been found. When they were building the Darnley Bridge in the 1920s or so, they discovered all of these great big skeletons. We're talking skeletons of 8, 9 feet tall, that long, under the ground when they're in the mud, where they were building the Darnley Bridge here in Prince Edward Island. And it is a common thing to see all of these great big giants, whether they're discovered in California or in Pennsylvania, where these giant skulls and skeletons, which are sent to the Smithsonian Institution or whatever, they are never, ever, ever seen again or heard from again. There's a real kind of embargo on the idea of giants living among us. And yet, if you look in the Bible, in Ephesians 6:6, Ephesians 6:6 says there were giants in those days. We're talking before Adam and Eve. So there were giants. There are giant creatures in our midst. Take David and Goliath. Who was Goliath? Was he like Andre the Giant, a wrestling federation champion? Or was he a real giant living among us? And in the Bible, the Old Testament, not the New Testament, you will see where they had a carnal knowledge of what we would call hominids, Homo sapiens, and that happened in those days. And so what do we make of all of that? I ask you. Now, I'm going to ask you to tell me what kind of thing would you like me to recapitulate, or perhaps some phenomenon that I haven't even mentioned. Is there anything on your mind that you would like me to talk about?
The stone axe.
I beg your pardon?
The stone axe.
The stone axe. I do not know where I got that. Probably shouldn't even have it. But as a child, I was always around our house, or house trailer. Wherever we were, I've always seemed to have that. I don't know what to make of it. It's an adze. And I think more than anything, it's something for chopping, and I don't know what to make of it, but feel the weight of it. I don't know, I guess I didn't circulate it. It's an amazing thing. Some of these stones, and there are many, many such stones, the weight of them is quite remarkable. You know, it's a little heavier than you'd expect for that size. Certainly meteorites were always very, very treasured by every culture for many things. You could take the Casbah in Mecca, that big black stone. What is that other than a meteorite? But we live in a world where things come here and they land and they're used. Granite is not native to PEI. We've had animals living here for probably 300 years. The second oldest fossil ever discovered in North America was discovered in French River, PEI, by a farmer about 150 years ago, of a Dimetrodon, 260 million years ago. This creature was wandering around Prince Edward Island, and he was probably complaining about the climate change. He said, oh, the saber-toothed visitations are really down this year. The saber-toothed tigers are down. The volcanoes in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick are acting up even worse than ever. And he was probably thinking the apocalypse was coming. But there we have an island of wonders. And as I approach my own demise, I probably can only live another 30, 40 years. I don't know. My daughter's in Australia, my son's in China. We talked to them yesterday on that Skype thing. It's a crazy world we're living in. He talks to me about learning Mandarin, doing this, doing that. My daughter is on Fraser Island with wild dingoes. We're living in a weird world. I don't know, I hate to die on them right now. They're going to have to travel so much, it's going to be a 16-hour flight to get back. And I wouldn't be buried in the cemetery, which all the Wrights around here were buried in that beautiful cemetery. And I used to run from the cemetery, from the Bedeck Baptist Church. I'd run down to the Callback store every Sunday. I'd be running with Jimmy Baglowell. He was an MLA in later years. But Jimmy and I would run from Sunday school down to the comic store. Every time after Sunday school, we'd run and do that. And I was hoping that Shirley Burns was going to be here tonight, because Shirley Burns still goes to the Bedeck Church. And I went to school with her, and I was going to say, Shirley, you and I will run from the Bedeck Church to the comic store and see who wins. Now, I wasn't too big in those days, but Jimmy's legs were only about this long. And my legs were that long, so I would beat Jimmy all the time. I was hoping Jimmy would be here tonight. He's not. I was hoping Ronnie Rayner would be here because we could reminisce about the Sons of Pioneers. And but there you have a whole bunch of things, guys. And beside the knick-knack ads, is there any other thing that is on your mind? And George, you can't say anything.
The Phantom Ship.
A big part?
The Phantom Ship.
The Phantom Ship. Betty, my girlfriend, she and all of her classmates in grade 12 saw the Phantom Ship in they were after grad party in Malmurvey Beach near New Glasgow, and she saw in the middle of the day this Phantom Ship going up and down the strait, and the sailors jumping off the rigging and the flames and everything. And one of my own feelings of the Phantom Ship, I've never seen it, but I've talked to his captain of the Abequit, who actually moved the Abequit, the old car ferry, the original one, moved it towards this flaming thing. He thought that there was a ship on fire in the strait. So he took the Abbey and moved it towards the ship in distress, but it was the Phantom Ship. I'm thinking the Phantom Ship is the creation of the slave trade. There was a lot of slaving going on in the 1500s, 1600s, where the Mi'kmaq people would be taken as slaves and put on board these ships and taken away. And I'm thinking that there is a case where a whole bunch of them rebelled and set fire to the ship, and they all burned on this Phantom Ship. I do not know that is perhaps the origin of the Phantom Ship, but I'm thinking, why do you have a fire on a ship and people jumping off it? Well, they can't swim, so they don't know what to do. They're jumping off it. So I'm thinking slavery in the old days was the origin of the Phantom Ship. We not only had the Phantom Ship, we had the Phantom U-boat in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. People saw the U-boat moving around the Gulf, and again, long after the war was over, and Admiral Buchner's U-boats were all gone to Argentina, so wherever they took all the Nazis, but that were going to escape. But again, who knows what people are seeing when they see a Phantom Ship or a Phantom U-boat? What do we see? Do we see something engraved in the heraldic universe, in the kind of like a recording, an old wax recording? Is there something in there that is engraved forever, and we see it and feel it, and we relive it, and I don't know. But the Phantom Ship tends to go against the wind, and it tends to occur in October, November, and it's seen at night, where it's just a big ball of fire, or seen in the day, and many things that you see in the day are impossible to believe. Now the point being, my son and I, we lived on an island called Fatuhiva 2 winters ago. We lived in a little remote island in the Polynesian Islands called Fatuhiva. Tor Heyerdahl went there in 1939 because he thought it was going to be like paradise. And in any event, you get on these little islands, and what happened when Captain Cook and the other explorers were coming into the Pacific Islands, the natives could not see that ship as it was approaching. I'm thinking the Mi'kmaq could not even see the great big ships of Cartier and L'Escarbot and whatever. They could not see them because it's just impossible to believe. You could not see something when you've only seen big sea canoes and canoes. To believe something would come across the strait so you can't see them. The Cook Islanders could not see Captain Cook's ship as it came in. It just was beyond their universe. And so that happens when we are encountering something that is beyond our ken. It is thought that really what we are like flatlanders, when we see something coming in our two-dimensional universe, we see a hand coming, we really just see 5 circles. We don't really understand what we're seeing. And I'm thinking, I don't really understand what I'm seeing. I, as a little boy of 7, we didn't have TV. I didn't know about too many things like that. And what I encountered in the sky over Wilmot Valley was perhaps what I was seeing was what I could kind of work with. But maybe somebody else would see something a little bit different. Now, I perhaps will ask for one more question from the audience, and then I'll do something else. Is there any other thoughts that you might have?
What's your experience with witches?
I lived with a witch one time. And her name was Cat Summers, and she was from Newfoundland. And I was driving home from university, and I saw this girl. And I've only seen 3 people in my life with little things all moving around them like little orbs. One was a girl in Summerside, Carol, and I'm madly in love with this Summerside Sea Queen, this girl. She got married to another guy, a Skierman. But anyway, Carol married Brent. But I saw all these little orbs around her. And Lindy Klimo was another person I saw. She's an artist. All these little orbs around her. And we were close together for a little while, Lindy Klimo and I. And then there was this witch-type girl. White rubber boots, hitchhiking along, hitchhiking backwards like that. I picked her up. We went to Wilmot Valley, and I was living in a little cottage there. And I lived with this witch. She was a witch. She said that she even knew Charles Manson. She even knew Charles Manson, and she became a witch. She said in Newfoundland, Portugal Cove, she became a witch, she said, because Esso service stations had in those days little thing, how to become a witch, and they would give them away. How to do this, how to do that, how to become a witch, how to cast spells, all this. So she became a witch, and she was a bad girl, and I wouldn't even go into that, but she was a bad girl, she was a witch, and she was a wild, crazy girl, and she was a genius, and that was Charlotte Summers, or Cat Summers. Her father was the chairman of the history department at Memorial University, and but in any event, she lived in California, and she lived all over the United States, and she was a witch, and she had these powers, and as the Bible says, keep away from witches, and I've kept away from witches ever since.
Well, Wayne, thank you very much for that.
Oh, dismissal.